Praise be Jesus and Mary. Today we're going to continue our reflections on the divine attributes of God, and the attribute that we'll reflect on today is God's infinity. God is infinite. Infinite is a term that you don't find in the scriptures because it's a philosophical term. In Latin, the term is infinitus. Prefix is in, the adjective finitus. Finitus means defining or finite. So if you go to the Vatican City, for example, one of the things that defines Vatican City are the massive walls that surround the city. Those walls define the parameters of the Vatican. And there's also the word finis in Latin, which means a boundary or an end. Sometimes in older movies you'll see at the end of the movie it'll say fine at the end, which means the end of the movie. So the word Latin, finitus, if you put the prefix in before it, that means not. So the word becomes not finite or without limits or without end or no boundaries. The Greek word for infinite or unlimited or boundless is aperion. If you put an A in a Greek word, the alpha before the word, it's a negation of that word. So we even know that in English, some of our terms, right? For example, you have the term theist. Theist is someone who believes in God. You put the A before that, they become atheist, right? Someone who denies God's existence. Or even the word agnostic. Agnostic in Greek literally means someone who's an ignoramus, someone who doesn't have knowledge. Gnosis is knowledge in Greek, so agnosis is someone who doesn't have knowledge. In Greek, perar or peras means end or limit or boundary. So if you put A before that, aperion means not finite or not limited. So from a negative point of view, saying that God is infinite means that God actually has no limitation whatsoever. He has no end and he is boundless. Because God is infinite, he cannot be measured by any finite standard. So it's not that we just can't perceive God's limits, which is true, we can't, but also it's the fact that God doesn't have limits. Not just that we can't perceive him, he doesn't have any limits whatsoever. On the negative side of the coin, God has no limits. From a positive point of view, the infinity of God means that God possesses the fullness of every possible reality. He has the fullness of every perfection. Every perfection in God is infinite, meaning that it's found in the highest degree in him. So God is infinitely holy, infinitely good, infinitely just, infinitely wise, infinitely beautiful, infinitely loving, etc. Every attribute of God can be predicated or preached by that qualification, infinite. Some of these things that we're saying are a bit similar or even analogous to what we say about Our Lady's Immaculate Conception. How's that? Well, immaculate means what? It means without stain, right? On the one hand, from a negative point of view, so you don't have something, you don't have stain. Our Lady has no original sin. And what's more, of course, we know she never committed any sin in her life. But on the other hand, on a positive point of view, being the Immaculate Conception means that Our Lady was full of every grace at the same time. So immaculate means without sin and full of grace at the same time. Infinite means without limits and full of every perfection at the same time. We said that the word infinite is not found in the scriptures. However, the Vulgate Bible, which is St. Jerome's, he says this, Psalm 144, verse 3, he translates it this way. He says, Magnus Dominus et laudabilis nimis et magnitudinis eius non est finis. Translation, he says, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness, of his greatness, there is no end, says St. Jerome. So in that verse, there's certainly an indication of God's infinity, at least from the point of his greatness. His greatness is without measure. Only God is infinite in reality, not potentially and not hypothetically either. Only God is truly, really infinite. All creatures, all created things are finite by definition. There's no such thing as an infinite creature. It doesn't exist. It can't exist. There's another definition, Zenekeli Etymological Dictionary, so we're giving a good Greek and Latin, and we didn't throw in Hebrew today, but we're getting a good dose of languages today. Zenekeli, which is the Italian dictionary, defines infinite as that which is absolutely free of spatial and temporal determinations. So God, what does that mean? It means God is not determined. He's not determined by space or time or matter. He created all those things, so he can't be determined by them. And as a side note, we know that God's plans are not determined either. Not determined by creation, not determined by the fall, for that matter. It's God who determines his plans. Nothing outside of God determines what he does or what he's going to do. So that touches on the question of sin. Is it true that Jesus Christ became man because of Adam's sin? No, we say no. Why? Because God's plans are not determined by sin. Yes, Jesus did come as a redeemer, but he would have come anyway because that was God's plan all along. That's the Franciscan thesis on the absolute primacy of Christ in a nutshell. When we say that someone has potential, sometimes we say that as a word of encouragement. It means that if they apply themselves to playing a sport or a musical instrument, for example, if they apply themselves, they can become very good. Someone who has potential. In God, there's no potential for anything. God has no potential. And we don't mean that as an insult. Why does God have no potential? It means he lacks nothing. He doesn't have any need to add anything to himself. He's infinite. He's full of every perfection. He is pure act, as the philosophers call him, meaning that literally there is no potential in God. He can't get better in anything. He's already the best in every single thing. If you understand the term infinite extensively, so how far it extends, it means that which cannot be completely traveled or gone over. That's what it means extensively. If you understand it in terms of intensively, meaning that something cannot be entirely grasped. So God is inexhaustible, he's incomprehensible. The human mind cannot grasp him because he is infinite. If you think about it for a second, down here we have trouble understanding other people, right? The husband doesn't understand the wife doesn't understand the husband. You can imagine, all the more so God. If you can't understand your spouse, try to understand God. You can't do it. He is infinite. He cannot be comprehended. Our minds and our understanding are finite, meaning they're limited. God's mind and his understanding, his whole being is infinite. For Blessed John Duns Scotus, the essential, most important characteristic of God is his infinity. God must be infinite, says Scotus, because he's the first efficient cause, meaning that he's the creator of all things. So that which is finite, meaning us, comes from that which is infinite, meaning God, just like every effect comes from a cause. And since God is also the final cause of everything, meaning the goal or the purpose of everything, he must also be infinite from that perspective, says Scotus, because there's also a natural love and desire rooted in all of us towards something that is infinite. We all have some kind of desire in us for something that's infinite, a certain desire that we have. There's a desire for love without end. There's a desire for life without end. There's a desire of the fullness of every good thing and every perfection. Why do we have all those desires in us in some way, shape, or form? Why are they there? Because we were created by God and we were created for God as well. We were created by the one who is infinite, and we were created for the one who is infinite, the one who alone can fulfill all the deepest desires of our hearts. So God put those great desires in us, and he wants to be the one to fill those desires as well. And I think that the one spiritual application we can add to all of this is that the most reasonable thing for us to do, for a finite creature to do, the most reasonable thing is to entrust yourself to someone who's infinite. Entrust yourself to someone who is the fullness of every perfection, especially since we know that God's character includes the fact that he is all good, all loving, all perfect, just, and wise, etc. So let's ask Our Lady for the grace to humble our finite and limited ways of seeing and understanding and doing things. And let's ask her for the grace to open up ourselves to the infinite wisdom and to the perfect plan of God for our lives. As the Apostle James says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you, says James 4, verse 10. Very important. And also we add for good measure that if we humble ourselves before others as well, not just before God, but also if we humble ourselves before others, God will exalt us all the more. Why? Because infinity really, really, really loves humility. Infinity loves humility. Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Amen.